All right. Testing, testing. Hello, this is Liz. Welcome to Friday. It is Freebie Friday, and now today it's a little bit of Film History Friday. I am one of the reference librarians at the Derry Public Library, and of the reference staff, definitely the most cinema minded of the few, which is a nice way to say Liz just watches movies a lot. So today I'm going to talk about free movies because, again, I know not everyone can afford to have Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, and I remember back in my day, I was very good at finding movies for free. Just shh, don't tell the feds. Today we have with me my little Hilo again, at least for a limited time. Who knows when he'll just decide, nope, I don't want to be here anymore. So the first site we're going to talk about is Tubi. And again, just remember these movies do require that you put up with ads, but not on the table, sweetie. And he's off. First, we're going to talk about there are some horror movies today. I know that I try to focus outside of that, but I feel like these are some good titles that I at least need to highlight. The first is Dario Argento's Suspiria. So this is 1977. There was a remake a few years ago, which I actually really enjoyed. Tilda Swinton will get me to watch most things. This stars Jessica Harper, who you might know her from Pennies from Heaven, or if you're into the more like cult side of movies, she was in Phantom of the Paradise. She plays an American student who goes to a ballet academy, and whoops, it's populated with witches. I recommended this to a friend one time, or at least I talked about it, and she's like, I looked this up on Wikipedia, and this plot makes no sense. And that is true. Suspiria, you do not watch Suspiria, or most Italian horror films from the late 70s, early 80s for a plot. You watch it for the visuals, and Suspiria is one of the most beautiful films ever made. It has this beautiful Technicolor look. They're very bright colors. It's a visually appealing movie, and that's Dario Argento's big strength, is he knows how to make and stage beautiful things, even when horrible things are happening to people. But I would say, if you want to watch this, go in looking for a fun film, but not a coherent one. In fact, I think I actually called the Suspiria remake It's Suspiria if it were coherent. The next one I'm going to talk to you about is a horror film, definitely for the I don't like horror, but I'll watch this. The Stepford Wives, and again, the original, the 1975. This is one where I'll say, do not watch that remake. It is terrible. It's got a few funny lines and that's it. This one is woman and her husband move to a town in Connecticut and they just notice everyone acts a little off. Originally written by Ira Levin, who you might know as the writer of Rosemary's Baby, and definitely a reaction to the idea of, women are becoming not less domestic. Women still do a bulk of the domestic labor, but getting out of the house and having roles outside of the home. And it is sort of this worst case scenario of what happens if there's a whole group of people in this town who really don't like that and are willing to do whatever they can to make sure their wives stay very placating and subservient women. I think it's still sends chills up my spine. I think it's still a very effective film, but again, just don't watch the remake. The next, we're going to go for something completely fun. Are you a Jean-Claude Van Damme fan? Well, I am, and I absolutely love Bloodsport. It is, if you like martial art films and you like Jean-Claude Van Damme, this is the movie for you. I absolutely had to recommend it. It is absolutely ridiculous. But if that is what you are in for, and I think a lot of people are looking for a laugh right now, Bloodsport's for you. The final film from Tubi that I'm going to recommend is a great hidden treasure. It was actually released by the Criterion Collection a few years ago, Mikey and Nicky, and this is directed by Elaine May. If that name sounds familiar, she is unfortunately best known for directing the box office bomb Ishtar. But she actually directed a good number of comedies in the 70s. She directed A New Leaf with Walter Matthau, and she co-starred with him. She directed The Heartbreak Kid, and she directed this gangster comedy drama, Mikey and Nicky, with Peter Falk and John Cassavetes. This movie was definitely kind of an underseen treasure for years, and I'm very glad that it's gotten reassessed and rediscovered by a lot of people. So if you want to see a good hidden gem of 70s cinema, Mikey and Nikki is for you. So on to Crackle. The first one is most famous for the movie that it beat in the 1980 Oscars. So a lot of good movies came out in 1980, and the one that everyone really liked was Raging Bull. And what movie ended up winning? Robert Redford's Ordinary People. And for a lot of people who follow the Oscars, like me, it's just one of those movies that became known as, ugh, that shouldn't have won. But it actually, on its own merits, is a good movie, and I think a very good and effective melodrama. Again, Donald Sutherland is in it. He plays the father. I love Donald Sutherland. Mary Tyler Moore is probably the best she's ever been as a very cold, tightly wound mother. And Judd Hirsch plays a psychiatrist. It's a great family drama, and something I appreciate about it is, and granted, this credit goes to Judith Guest, who wrote the original book. I like that it is the father who is the more emotionally open one rather than the mother. I think many authors, they would have just gone with the standard roles of the mother being more open and ready to move on and the father being more cold. And I think that not only does it work for this movie, the actors make it work really well. So I would say have some tissues handy, but if you want to watch Ordinary People, again, on its own merits, not on the fact that it beat Raging Bull for Best Picture, definitely watch it. The next one, this is one very close to my heart, mainly because I remember the VHS cover from when I was a wee youngin'. It is the 1988 remake of The Blob. So whenever people talk about horror remakes, there's usually three that get brought up. There's The Fly, David Cronenberg's remake of The Fly, the 78 version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and John Carpenter's The Thing. But I think the 1988 remake of The Blob is pretty good. You definitely get to see more of the Blob in action and see what happens to people in the Blob. It is Shawnee Smith, who's a great scream queen. Since Frank Darabont was involved with this movie, you get to see a little bit of Jeffrey DeMunn. If you want a good 90-minute sort of, horror/action adventure, The Blob is great. Definitely revisit it. The next two movies are definitely not, well, one of them maybe. But the first is Bugsy, Warren Beatty, Annette Bening. Very good movie. Definitely recommend that. I mean, Warren Beatty, other than Town and Country, or I don't know, I thought Rules Don't Apply wasn't great. But Warren Beatty is someone I just like to watch. I think he's a really good actor. And Bugsy, I think, is a charming movie. But the one that I'm really going to recommend is 1988's Casualties of War. And this one tends to get overshadowed by the film Platoon, two movies that about the Vietnam War came out within a similar amount of time. And Platoon, if you know anything about Oscars, like won everything in sight and definitely is still part of the cultural zeitgeist. Casualties of War is, I believe, directed by Brian De Palma, starring Michael J. Fox in a rare dramatic role and Sean Penn. It's about young man goes to Vietnam to fight the war and witnesses a war atrocity. And and this is why it gets a lot of comparisons to Platoon, but I think it is a very powerful film. I think Michael J. Fox is fantastic. Again, he is more known for comedic roles, but I think he's a great dramatic actor as well. It's a shame that he's not acting as much anymore, but I think this is the one really dramatic role he has. I think it's a great entry in that. And I think in terms of Vietnam films, it gets ignored a lot, and I wish it's one that people could revisit. So if you are someone who liked Platoon, I would definitely look up Casualties of War. Okay, so I promised I'd talk about the wildest film you've never seen, and this is something you can technically find for free on YouTube. You have to dig a little. But once upon a time in the early 70s, Tippi Hedren and her husband at the time, Noel Marshall, really liked animals. And they wanted to make a movie. And this movie became Roar. So they started trying to finance this in like 1970. This movie wasn't released until 1981. And it wasn't even released in the United States. And why is that? Well, it's about a family who goes to live on a wildlife reserve full of Mainly lions, some tigers, but mainly lions. And when they made this movie, do you know what those lions weren't? Trained. So the tagline for this movie now, if you were to find the Blu-ray, is no animals were harmed during the making of this movie, but cast and crew were. Jan de Bont, who you may know as the director of Twister, he's an action director. He worked on this movie and was scalped. He had to have massive surgery to reconnect his scalp. Melanie Griffith, who was Tippi Hedren's daughter and Noel Marshall's stepdaughter, nearly lost an eye, and you actually see her getting partially mauled by a lion in this movie. It is one of the most bananas films I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot of things. So I'm gonna say this. If you thought Tiger King was wild, wait till you check out Roar. There's a whole scene where just it is Tippi Hedren and her family being chased around the house by lions and terrorized. And again, keep in mind, these were not trained lions. These were just wild animals. So between that and this movie, I think we have great cinematic examples as to why you just shouldn't own big cats and just let them live in the wild. So I don't know if I would recommend watching Roar because it is overall boring. There is a massive what am I watching? What is this going to turn into? Am I going to see someone like get massively injured on screen? But there's also kind of a train wreck, where is this going factor. But it's definitely not as slickly produced as Tiger King. But I would recommend researching the film Roar and just letting your jaw hit the floor at the just supreme amount of irresponsibility on the part of Noel Marshall. So, with that, have a great weekend. I will see you on Monday with the director recommendations. And go enjoy the sunny day outside before we have our April snow, because that is New England weather for you. Bye!